Welcome to the Nourishment Mindset Podcast, your guide to good food, good health, and a good life. And now, here's your host, Nutrition Network advisor and author of the Nourishment Mindset, Dixie Huey.
All right, happy Transformation Tuesday, y'all. We are upon Thanksgiving, which is my favorite holiday, because I don't like fretting or doing the gifting or anything. I just love the pleasures of the table. And I just want to say today, I'm so excited for my guest, Michelle Hurn. She is a pioneer in the world of nutrition, especially because she is a registered dietitian. To me, she's like a rebel. And Michelle, I like rebels so much that I have that tattoo.
Nice.
This is actually my former Newfoundland. She lives here now. But anyway, no, a rebel coming from me is a huge compliment. So you had my attention from the second you stepped on stage last winter at Low Carb Boca. A lot of these conferences, it's interesting. It's very scientific. There's all kind of papers and there's arguments and everything. But you were this breath of fresh air, this like real human, authentic, vulnerable. And your talk was so different because here you were talking about your struggles with eating and how we need to basically in that low carb world open up our mind, our eyes, and our hearts just to beyond, to me, just sort of the, how low can I go, or all the other arguments, meat, not meat, blah, blah, blah. So you're the exact kind of person that I want to speak to here with this metabolic mission to reverse chronic lifestyle disease. And almost, that's super important. But as important to me is pleasures of the table. Like we should enjoy nourishing ourselves. And Michelle, you're a badass. You're an ultra runner, a complete badass.
Thank you.
Run, eat meat, repeat. You are powered by meat, and your book is awesome, y'all. This is Dietician's Dilemma. There is fabulous Michelle on the cover, and you open this book. You say, what would you do if your health was restored by doing the exact opposite of what you were taught? Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. I appreciate that.
So you had to recover your health by doing the opposite of what you were taught. Tell us about that. What does that even mean?
Yeah, gosh, if I can kind of give you the quick Reader's Digest version of, my story. My health journey really began when I was 12 years old. I was diagnosed with anorexia. I was 5 feet tall, 57 pounds, put in inpatient treatment for 2 months, was put on a 24-hour tube feeding system, was given about a 10% chance to survive, immediately fed the standard American diet. And I did regain weight at that point, but I was told as a 12-year-old, like, hey, you know what, you're going to deal with this your whole life. You're constantly going to be having anxiety, depression, racing thoughts around food. When I was in treatment, I was put on 7 different prescription medications. And they were right. I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to become this very high functioning human with an eating disorder. And, throughout high school and college, I struggled. I often went through periods where I would, relapse, I'd lose weight. And then I became an athlete, but because I had low bone density, I had several stress fractures. And I thought if I could become a dietitian, maybe I could not only help other people with this, what I had went through, but I think a lot of people who, are searching for, or who go through experiences in life, like you're kind of trying to figure out your own health. Like, how can I heal myself with food? Because I knew I had gone from, being very underweight and very sick to at a point where I was weight restored, but I also was still suffering. I felt for most of my life, I kind of felt like I was standing on the sidelines of my own life. I was plagued by anxiety. I had periods of chronic depression, as recent as 2017, really struggling with suicidal ideation, pondering taking my own life. And so, I became a dietitian, and immediately, things didn't make sense. Things in healthcare did not make sense. For example, we'd go in the room with somebody with type 2 diabetes, and my preceptor would say, okay, we're going to teach them how to eat carbohydrates consistently throughout the day. Like, oh wait, isn't their blood sugar high? Well, yeah. Well, shouldn't we have them not eat so many carbohydrates? So I would just ask questions. And my, my preceptors would get so frustrated. Like I was kind of pegged as this difficult dietetic student. Like, no, and that's one of the issues as a dietitian. We are taught, not just taught, like indoctrinated, like very from the time, the first class you take, like carbohydrates are the foundation of human nutrition. Carbohydrates are important for everything. Your brain will be dead if you don't have carbohydrates. And then, I'll never forget going into the ICU during our ICU rotation and flipping over the bag of tube feeding and being like, oh my God, these are the same ingredients I was fed as a 12-year-old. And at this point, I'm 24 and now I'm almost 40. So we're talking, decades later, and it's still the same. We are feeding people who can't take food by mouth. Number one ingredient, maltodextrin, corn syrup solids, soy protein, very inflammatory ingredients.
Are
so
there
I just would
oils
ask.
in there, Michelle?
Yeah, canola oil is the number one.
That's my rule on this podcast. Every single one I have to bitch about seed oils. So seed oils,
there you go. It's in
little bag.
Well, and so like I would just ask, I'd say, hey, is this the best way to feed somebody who's been in a traumatic car accident or maybe has a nose or mouth cancer? And I, once again, preceptors would say, hey, it's about calories. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. They need to get enough protein and calories. And so, but you're new, right? You're a student. You're like, okay, I'm learning. Okay. But when I became a dietitian, I just saw this revolving door sickness. My patients with diabetes, come in and you're in acute care. So you don't have much time with people. They come in with a diabetic infection a month later. Now we're amputating their leg, or they have heart disease, or now they're in chronic kidney failure. And it became distressing. It's like you go into healthcare, and I want to really emphasize that every person I've met in healthcare, nurses, doctors, every person genuinely cares. Like it's rare to find somebody. I mean, you might find someone who's kind of burnt out, but people go into that field because they want to help people, but when you get in there, you're like, this system is not helping people, and so, but it really, like you said, it wasn't until 2019 that I lost my own health. So that's when I figured out, like, oh my God, this is when I'm going to, that's when I basically changed what I was doing nutritionally. And I had no idea. If you had told me it was going to have as big of an impact on my life as it has, I would have told you you're nuts. So I was like, no way. But yeah, that was the big turning point for me.
And so if folks have not yet read, I got my copy on Amazon. Is that the best place to get it, Michelle?
Yeah, that's the place.
So if they haven't read this, what is this dilemma, this thing that helped you recover your health, this thing where you're doing the opposite of what you thought and what you kind of had to teach people? What is that? Can we spoiler alert?
Yeah. So, most people are taught from the time you're very young in elementary school, you see the food pyramid and now the My Plate. And we're taught like that's how we're supposed to eat. And so, like I said, for my whole life, that's how I ate. And I became an endurance athlete and a marathon runner. And I was eating a ton of carbohydrates, lots of whole grains, lots of oatmeal, lots of whole grain bread, lots of sweet potatoes. Yeah, healthy whole grains, lots of chicken, lots of salads. And I was miserable. My anxiety, the period, I was on lots of prescription medication. Sometimes I'd have panic attacks, would have to miss work, and my body often hurt. But like I said, 2019, I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. And everything went from bad to worse. Like my health was terrible. Everything hurt. And so after reaching out to a few sports dietitians, they told me, you need to eat more carbohydrates. And so as you can imagine, going from 400 to 500 to 550 grams, like I was getting cold sweats. I was, you'd go from feeling euphoric to feeling depressed. And, I basically had a come to Jesus moment where I came home from work early, passed out on the couch at like 2:00 and woke up and it just felt like my whole body was on fire. Like everything hurt. And so at 2 a.m, I was just out of answers. Like I did not know what to do. And I think a lot of people who are, in pain, like whether you have diabetes or you're obese or you're depressed, like we've tried everything the doctors have told us to do. We've tried therapy, we've tried prescription medication, we've tried changing our diet, and nothing is working. And so I'm at that point standing in my kitchen, like, I do not have answers, you know? And so I grabbed my car keys, drove to 7-Eleven, and got 2 in the morning, got 30 pounds of ice and just put it in the bathtub. And I'm just sitting in this ice bath crying.
That's
And
pretty.
that's when, yeah, that's when my wife walked in and is like, maybe we should do something different. And I'm like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done running. I'm never running again. This is stupid. I'm too old. And yeah, if you had told me like, hey, you know what, this day is going to change your life, I would have told you like, yeah, get the fuck out of here.
Ice bath day.
But I remember thinking like, well, if I'm not going to run, why don't I reduce my carbohydrates? I intuitively knew they weren't making me feel well, but it had just been so deeply ingrained into me that
have them. You're
yes,
endurance athletes.
well, even just as a functioning human, oh, your hormones will, not work. Oh, your brain won't work. And so I decided, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do a low carbohydrate diet for 30 days. The opposite of everything I had been told. As a dietitian, I was told it was a fad diet. It was bad for your heart. And then I stumbled upon the carnivore diet, which is a completely animal based, no carbohydrate diet. And I remember like laughing, like, oh, this is totally nuts. But I took it kind of like a step beyond that and saying like, okay, well, this is very different than what I'm doing. And, you get online and you start reading and you're like, some of these people online look pretty happy and pretty healthy. And I'm definitely not happy and healthy. And so, I reached out to a few doctors in the community, kind of shared my story. And I'm very grateful. People like Dr. Eric Westman, Dr. Ben Bickman, just shared some papers with me, said, hey, you're a dietitian, look at these papers on ketogenic diets and diabetes. Like that, I had never come across that. That was never taught to me as a dietitian, like how effective they were, how safe these diets were, how sustainable. And so, yeah, I decided I was going to, follow the opposite of everything I was taught. I was going to eat meat and fat. I did still drink coffee for 30 days and see how that impacted my health.
And too old to run
well,
anymore,
and for people running? Who are, I gotta tell my wife, I'm like, this is what I want to do. And she was like, the hell you are. This is not happening. And, to be fair, I have a history of a pretty serious eating disorder. And our society says that if you eliminate certain food groups, it's eating disordered. She thought about it. She cried. And finally, she was just like, whatever, you're an adult, you're going to quit. And I can't even tell you why I felt so drawn to it. And my only thought was like, maybe this extra protein will help my muscles, because my body hurts, hurt beyond, I've run my whole life, hurt beyond what running, should feel like. And it was definitely kind of weird. I was still working in the hospital setting at this time. So, you go in with all these women dietitians and they're eating their bagels and oatmeal. And I got this big bowl of meat. I'm like, that's different, for breakfast. But I noticed
back on a plate.
Yeah. I noticed right away that I wasn't hungry, which was kind of a miracle, because I used to eat, at least 8 times a day. You're constantly snacking, constantly looking at your watch. Is it time for lunch? Is it time for snack? And then about the 3rd or 4th day, I noticed my body didn't hurt. But I was like, oh, that must be because I'm not running. It's first time in my life, taking a minute, not running. But then kind of the big turning point came at right around 3 weeks. I came home from work and my wife is literally sitting there on the couch and was like, will you come here for a second? And, you never want to hear that. You walk in the door. It's like, oh no, did something die? What did I do? But she, she was like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know if I like how you're eating, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you.
Just
11 years and 3 weeks. And that's when we both were kind of like, whoa, what is going on? Because I knew that was true. I knew I was calm. I was sleeping. My attitude had shifted from being, like I said, anxious and, dealing with panic attacks to being very go with the flow, just different human. And that's what, I'm really, like I said, I'm grateful that I just had so many, health professionals willing to direct me towards research and, Dr. Chris Palmer, Dr. Georgia Eid. Because like I said, I knew I felt better, but I didn't know why. So I'm looking at what does the research say? I had no idea, part of my theory is, we certainly know that just stabilizing the blood sugar, with protein and fat can reduce anxiety. But I also think, and we know, the number one mineral deficiency worldwide is iron. And so for the first time in my life, I'm getting a ton of iron, I'm getting all this meat. But but I'm also not eating so much oat, or at that point, none oats and grains and things to bind with it. I'm not taking in all this fiber and this phytic acid, but all these things, once again, I thought I needed. I thought I had to have fiber and I had to have these whole grains. And so, I decided like, okay, this is clearly working, and this is clearly improving my health. And I kind of naively thought, wow, maybe they'll let me teach this in the hospital. I can go, teach. We have this research articles on low carb education.
They'll want to know this.
They're going to want to know. It's going to help people heal. Yeah, that definitely did not happen. You're in most large hospital institutions, you're not allowed to teach low carb guidelines. You can literally lose your license or get suspended. I was told that right away, like absolutely not. Yeah, so obviously that's challenging, because once you get your health back, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And then yeah.
Wow, what a story. Good for you. Folks, sometimes we just have to try something new, and that has to be harder for someone who's had it like drilled into her head that carbohydrates are what keeps your brain alive. You risk your life not eating carbohydrates, but you knew something was wrong. So that's that gut instinct that, I think a lot of things in this modern life pull us away from trusting that instinct, but it is there. And to be clear, folks, I am not saying that people should never eat carbohydrates. What I am saying is that the dogma, the diet dogma out there leaves a lot to be questioned, and that people should experiment and do what is right for them. I certainly feel much better, more blood sugar stable, all of that on a high protein, very low carbohydrate diet. So I feel you. That may not be for everyone, but for us too, that's what works. So it sounds like then, now I understand, this transformation for you came after your dietetic school, because one of the problems I had when I decided I wanted to get in this healthcare space, because I had to share this sort of like you at the hospital, was, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to go back to grad school. And then I realized I'm going to be a pain in the ass in grad school, and I probably won't make it through, because what I'm going to be taught, I'm not going to agree with. And I'm going to be that guy or that gal always, questioning and arguing. And so I had to do I chose to do my training through the Nutrition Network in South Africa, because that's a low carbohydrate, high fat school, if you will, for practitioners. So you didn't have to be that gal in school. You became that gal after school.
Yes. I became a dietitian in 2009. So yeah, I definitely was in the kind of traditional dietetics for many years before I saw the light, for lack of a better word. And yeah, no, I agree with you too, that there's some confusion, I think, in the low carb community, that it's like, oh, you have to be zero carb or no carb all the time. And I think, when it comes to our nutrition in general, I think, like all species, humans are a species. We have a species specific diet, but it definitely can ebb and flow depending on your goals. Like obviously for somebody like myself who, is a long distance runner, I'm going to eat differently than somebody who potentially maybe is inactive or in a type 2 diabetic, so there's definitely some nuance to it. I feel like the foundation is similar for most people. Most people are going to do much better eating an animal-based diet, just because the protein, the fat, the vitamins and minerals are so bioavailable, meaning our body can use and absorb them very well. Exactly. Very nutrient dense, very easy to absorb. But then when it comes to whole food carbohydrates, I think how many you're going to have, how often, really depends on a lot of factors. Are you metabolically healthy? Are you active? Are you growing? So there's definitely some nuance there.
Right. Imagine that. It's not black and white.
I know. People want it to be, but it's not.
So you and I have some things in common. One is loving to work out. I'm no ultra anything, but fitness, very important. Food, important. We also have the disordered eating background. A real admiration for Mrs. Nina Teicholz. And I also see that you and I both have a true distaste for the U.S. dietary guidelines. In my book, Nourishment Mindset, I go back to the old school guidelines that frankly effed me up, what I call the piece of shit food pyramid. But you just posted the other day about the guidelines. Just here's a dietitian, y'all. And, I say this all the time, screw the guidelines. They're not meant, 88% of us are metabolically unhealthy, so they don't even apply anymore. But what say you on these government guidelines? Should we be following? Should we be doing my plate? My least thing about my plate is it says protein. It wouldn't dare say meat. What is
Well, I gotta tell you, first of all, we have an updated study from the 88%, and now it's 93% statistically. So only 7% of us are metabolically healthy.
So, y'all, that's the opposite of an A, right?
Right?
Like a super F. It was already an F, and now it's almost F minus. So, okay, yeah,
Yes.
7%.
Yeah, and I mean, for your listeners too, I feel like one thing that's very frightening as a U.S. population is the fastest growing demographic of obese humans is children, ages 2 to 5. But yeah, the nutrition guidelines are a total nightmare. They're not designed for health. It's no one in our country should have type 2 diabetes. You guys, we can reverse this in weeks. I had patients that were type 2 diabetic for decades. The guidelines are not science-based. They are corporation-based. There's so much money. I mean, most people I think kind of know like, oh yeah, it's money. No, there are astronomical amounts of money invested into, keeping people sick. And there's no money in health. If we reverse type 2 diabetes and obesity and chronic kidney disease and heart failure, we're going to put a lot of companies, especially prescription medications like insulin, out of business. So these guidelines are, they're ridiculous. The study I posted, I mean, I literally laughed out loud because, I was taught as a dietitian, it's like, oh, it's not that the guidelines are the problem. It's that people aren't following the guidelines.
Yes, non-compliant humans.
Non-compliant. So we're blaming the patient. But you know what, in my, and obviously there's some exceptions, but I practiced for 11 years and most people were really trying to follow the guidelines, eating, brown rice and chicken. The problem is when you eat like that, you're hungry all the time. You literally are setting yourself up to have, blood sugar spikes and crashes and, all these ultra processed foods, they override our body and brain's ability to stop eating them. And so the study came out and they basically had people follow the guidelines to a T. And this was a, randomized double-blind, so one of the best well-designed study. This wasn't like a food frequency questionnaire where they just ask questions. This was a very strict study. So they had people follow guidelines for 8 weeks, or they had people just kind of do whatever they like. They were monitoring what they did, but they actually ate at least 3.5 servings of highly processed foods. And in the study, they list them as fast food hamburgers, cheesecake, Jelly Belly, basically just kind of what the typical person eats, junk. And then they measured, they looked at their glucose and their blood lipids, and they were like, oh no. Both groups were the same. There was no improvement. You were better off, I don't want to say you're better off eating the junk food diet. I mean, you were equally as sick doing either one, so it's absolutely ridiculous. These guidelines are not designed for health. They never were, obviously, the history of them. And so the more, when they came out in 1980, we've seen every single chronic disease across the board increase, and not just kind of increase, not like, 5 to 10%. I'm talking exponentially. We've seen type 2 diabetes, heart disease, major depression, major anxiety disorders, cancer, all kinds of things increase. And, so much of disease comes down to, how you're fueling your body. And of course, there's other factors. There's sleep and stress and other things, but one factor that we have some control over is how we're eating, how we're fueling our bodies. And so, it's obviously my opinion and my advocacy and my research that if we want to heal as a nation, we have to start, stabilizing our blood sugar, eating highly bioavailable nutrition, and eliminating processed foods. And you and I have done, the best way to do that is through a low carbohydrate animal-based diet.
Hallelujah, y'all. Right? There it is. So on one hand, it's super bummer, we're getting an F minus and all of our disease, chronic lifestyle diseases are skyrocketing. But the awesome thing, I wish I had a fork with me when I eat my pin, is you can heal yourself with your fork pin. one bite at a time. So that puts the control back in your hands. So
Yeah, and I think one of the beautiful things about it is it doesn't really take that long. I mean, obviously, if you've been massively ill for decades, it's not going to be an overnight process. But I mean, I struggled with anxiety for 20 years,
3 weeks,
and so 3 weeks, 3 weeks, it was
21 days.
massively better. And we know, I mean, we have studies that as soon as 14 days, you can start to see insulin sensitivity improve with type 2 diabetics. And so we can like completely reverse diabetes in months, so.
Right. And that's the thing I like to emphasize with my clients too, is because some of them have kind of an extraordinary amount of weight that they would like to lose. And that can be very overwhelming. But what's under the hood, as you said, can be improved in a matter of days and weeks. And so that's already a massive win. People love to celebrate their scale victories. I'm the one over here like, look at that A1C, look at that fast insulin. So it's like the nerdy, it's not just the scale, y'all. It's what's under that hood. So let's switch gears a little bit. So I mentioned the eating disorder thing. We talked about yours. I was what I'll call failed anorexic. I tried. I was not as strong as you. I had to turn bulimic. I started binging. So I couldn't pull the trigger. So I was a laxative and exercise bulimic. So that's like extremely time consuming. And to use a horrible pun, I received a lot of shitty advice. What you've mentioned, eating every few hours, downing whole grains. So why does this bad advice persist? I'm so interested in how the body heals metabolically, but also especially from an eating disorder. One of the huge things that helped me, in addition to real whole foods, was lifting weights and getting stronger, which helped me mentally, etc. So I guess it's two questions. Why does this bad advice persist? And then what do you think on the flip side are the things that if someone is struggling either with overweight, underweight, eating disorder, disordered eating, what can they do? What do you recommend?
Yeah, those are great questions. And it's a really hard and scary topic, and I feel like anytime I talk about it, I have to always kind of disclaim that, like, if you are changing how you eat, I do think it behooves you to be working with a healthcare professional, especially somebody who's well informed with low carbohydrate education, if you are looking to do something differently than this standard treatment. So the standard treatment for somebody with, binge eating disorder, bulimia, anorexia is all the same. It's going to be to eat all foods in moderation, to follow the nutrition guidelines. If you're overweight, it'll be reducing consumption. If you're underweight, it'll be increasing your calories. And the reason this persists is because the idea is you cannot ask somebody with a disordered relationship with food to restrict or remove food groups. Like, oh, if you do that, that's going to cause more problems. But here's the deal. Disease doesn't care about your feelings. Disease, that completely ignores the physiological, what happens when we eat foods. That's the issue. So, everything we eat in our body is information. And certain foods, especially those ultra processed foods, can actually, override the brain and body's ability to stop eating them. And for some people, especially people that deal with binge eating disorder or food addiction, they will never be able to eat certain things without, it's like an alcoholic, they will. And so asking that person to do that is literally doing them to a lifetime of disease. And that's really unfortunate. And that's really horrible. But we're just taught as dietitians and healthcare professionals that, that's the only way to treat people, is they have to be able to eat everything in moderation.
And
so
when I was a kid struggling with this, I just thought I was a weak person with a poor character.
Yeah, and that's what you're told. Like, if you really care, then you would just stop. You would use willpower. And I was told if I really cared, that I would just eat. And it's like, I've never met a human being with an eating disorder that is not highly intelligent, that is. So it's like, oh, well, thanks. I didn't think of that. Like, obviously I want to do that. I wouldn't be in this predicament. So in my opinion and in my research, what we need to do is we need to let the brain and body heal. Like it's so interesting to me that we literally had a study. I presented this, in Boca, that like people with bulimia or binge eating disorder, anorexia, their GI system is damaged. It's like, well, no shit. Like if you've been starving yourself or binging and purging, your, intestinal epithelium, which, so much of your, neurotransmitters are in your gut. So that is damaged. So if we are going to eat a standard American diet that has lots of flours and sugars and fibers, and we're putting it into a system that's damaged, well, no wonder a lot of people with eating disorders have bloating and gas and pain and all these problems. And so I remember
it's not all in your head. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you're told, right? Oh, it's all in your head, It's not, it's you're literally in pain. So to me, it makes sense. Like, let's refeed you in a way that for the most nourishment, the least discomfort, and to help your system heal. Because no matter what, you're probably not going to feel, you're going to feel different, if you haven't been eating and you're eating. But if we're giving you food that is low fiber, that is high fats, that is very nutrient dense and absorbable, it's going to keep your blood sugar and energy stable, that isn't going to disrupt your sleep. And I've seen it, I've seen it in the eating disorder community, people going on these very, and this is not a low calorie diet, this is, 3,000 to 5,000 calories if you're underweight. Certainly if you're overweight, you can taper that down, but a very, high fat animal based diet that for the first time in a long time, they experience remission of symptoms. Dr. Sethi Shabani, they published a really great paper on binge eating disorder. I mean, people with decades long binge eating disorder had complete remission on a ketogenic diet. And, there's many different reasonings behind that. Always come back to, you're not hungry, your blood sugar is stable, neurotransmitters, your brain's actually functioning. So to me, this whole idea that, oh, that's restrictive. Well, let me tell you what's restrictive. And you and I both know, and anyone who's ever had an eating disorder knows, it's living with an eating disorder. You're standing on the sidelines of your own life. It rules every moment of your thoughts. It keeps you from doing things, from going places, from taking careers, from getting into relationships. It's horrible. Like if you had told me that I could, change, like I no longer worry, obsess, think about food. It frees up so much of your time and energy. I'm just able to eat and move on. And that's what food should be for everyone. And like you said, like I enjoy what I love what I eat, but I don't need to spend every waking minute thinking and obsessing about it.
Right. Awesome. That's just for anyone out there who's got friend, family member, kid struggling, I love this conversation because on one hand, it makes me feel so happy because I am recovered. I don't have these issues anymore. But per what you just said, I was in jail in plain sight. And it kind of pisses me off because it didn't matter what nutritionist I went to or what nurse, like the advice I got sucked. And the processed foods kept me sick. And I'm just this little kid. I mean, I'm 12, I'm 16, 20. I mean, it's a lot of time wasted. So in Dietitian's Dilemma, we've been talking about eating disorders. There are other things though, and you're a protein proponent, which I love. You talk about sarcopenia. So first, please tell us what that is and what do we need to know about sarcopenia, how to prevent it? It sounds very scary.
Well, unfortunately it is, it really is. Well, just the word sarcopenia means muscle wasting. And, after about the third decade of life, by the time you're about 30, your body just starts to synthesize protein not as well. And so meaning like whatever protein sources you eat, your body just isn't able to use them quite as effectively. So, if you're a kid and you're young, a lot of kids aren't eating that great, you still might be able to build muscle, maintain muscle. But as you get older, it becomes extra, extra important to take in high quality protein. And we're also learning, Dr. Gabriel Line is fantastic with this, that muscle protein is also an organ. It's like, it's actually telling our body what to do, as far as like an excretory organ, basically helping, participating in metabolism, which I think is super interesting. But what is really important, especially as you age, if you are not eating high quality protein, we think of our parents and we think of our grandparents, you could potentially start to experience muscle wasting. All of a sudden, I have patients as early as their 40s that, were starting to become really overly fat, but under muscled. They couldn't walk the few steps to the bathroom. Patients, things that maybe you and I take for granted. It's like, oh, we're able to put your pants on, get in the car. As you get older, if you fall, if you break a hip, we know statistically, especially if you break a hip, I think it's like 60% of people never regain mobility. Your quality of life is not great. And so, there's a kind of this movement right now in our world and society to eat less meat and to, all this nonsense, which we could probably spend hours talking about how it's just, the whole narrative that it's bad for the planet or whatever is just not true. But kind of the take home message.
Rogers, right?
Yes. Yes. I mean,
Sacred
Cow is a great book, great documentary. Yeah. And so what our recommended daily, the RDAs for protein are so low. It's like 0.08 per kilogram. It's for, if we eat that, we're going to lose muscle. If we eat that, and, muscle and protein isn't just, when we take in protein, it isn't just, for muscle building. It's also for hormones. It's for our immune system. It's for our brain functioning. It has so many different, things in the body. And so, yeah, kind of the take home message for that is it's a terrible idea to tell any person, in my opinion, to reduce their amount of animal protein. But especially as we age, we need to not only increase our protein, but we need to prioritize it. Meaning when you go into your meals, you really want to make sure you have a solid source of protein, not this dinky 2 to 3 ounces. You want to have a good solid portion of, whatever you're eating, whether it's, eggs, meat, cheese.
All that good nutrient dense stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've talked about the piece of shit food pyramid and all the stuff that has followed, like My Plate, etc. I mentioned how the My Plate now has protein instead of what I think it should say, meat, fish, etc. It's funny because it literally says fruits and vegetables, grains, dairy, and then this protein, as if all protein is, the same or equal. So for you, why is that wrong? You already mentioned how we have this message that we should be eating less and less, but okay, so we said My Plate. I know your plates may be a little bit different, but what do you think of My Plate and how would you change it?
Well, My Plate is ridiculous. It's not a human diet. We know it's a diet that, basically it's a great way. It's capitalism at its finest is what My Plate is. It's a great way to make money for healthcare institutions, pharmaceuticals, processed foods. And they all it's interesting to me, just recently a study was released to the Academy of Nutrition, the governing board of all dietitians, purchased stock into PepsiCo. Like they literally are using our funds, so it's like, they're all tied into it. I think Kraft owns Jenny Craig, it's a great way to keep people sick. So if you have someone you hate and you want them to be sick, tell them to follow. No, just all joking aside, we know carbohydrates raise your blood sugar, and when you what has carbohydrates? Fruit. There's fruit. What has carbohydrates? Dairy products, milks, yogurts. What is carbohydrates? Grains. So when you have all these carbohydrates on the My Plate, you're basically starting with an insulin response and a blood sugar crash. You're going to want to have more carbohydrates. So it's a total mess. It doesn't really, and it, like you said, it doesn't differentiate. You could follow the My Plate and have juice, white bread, tofu, and some Doritos, and it would tell you that there you go, that's great, good work. I feel like a diet for humans should be, what does the human body need to not just survive, because that's what the recommended daily allowances are, to thrive. And so, so that's, ruminant animals are some of the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. Ruminant animals, because of how, their bodies process grass. Ruminant animals are, cows, buffalo, bison, lamb, And so, that's what my plate looks like. You want to have quite a bit of protein. Protein has so many different functions in the body. I feel like it should be, it needs to be prioritized. So having, animal meats, having animal fats, having animal organs, in this country, we don't really eat organs, and, being able, and you don't need a ton, but having, an ounce a day, an ounce a day would be great. And that can be heart, liver, kidney. And then, and certainly, it doesn't have to just be meat. People, if you like fish, salmon, mackerel, there's so many different seafoods, oysters, clams. And then, I don't, some people like vegetables. I don't use a ton of vegetables. I do eat some carrots and some mushrooms and things, but there's kind of been this like, oh, all vegetables are good for you all the time. Really eat, I eat salads, all this stuff. Well, when you do that, a lot of people that, like you said, we grew up in the 90s with all this fat-free craze. If humans just eat a ton of salads, that doesn't provide a whole lot of nutrition. The human body doesn't use a lot of nutrition from plant sources very well. So if you want to eat vegetables, that's great, but I'd make sure that they don't crowd out the other really important things in your nutrition plan. So how my plate would be for the world would be mostly meat and fat, and certainly and that includes fish, that includes eggs, that includes, animal-based, nutrient-dense foods. And then, for the whole foods carbohydrates, seasonal fruits, raw fermented dairies. If you are very active, I certainly think you're fine having some of those other whole food carbohydrates, whether that's potatoes, rice, but those would be a very small, and, unfortunately, those would be for us metabolically healthy humans, which, like we said at the beginning of this podcast, is about 7% of the US.
A whole 7%. Well, listen to that, y'all. This is a heretic. I love it.
And so, yeah, you like, if you tried to teach this, you could not teach this in the, in the hospital setting, which is really unfortunate.
No, it's something. And you know what, folks? You can try it. Try it. You're not going to drop dead. Michelle's still alive. I'm still alive. And if what you're doing is working for you, then by all means, keep going. But I'm pretty sure that 93% of people, it's not working for them. So back to dietitian's dilemma. One of my favorite topics is cholesterol. I love cholesterol. My prior episode was called The Boogeyman.
Nice.
Blamed for everything, as you know, Michelle.
Yes.
So what do you have to say about cholesterol? Should we fear?
Well, just cholesterol in general. Yeah. It's so funny. When I was growing up, it was like, oh, even the nutrition guidelines, as terrible as they are, actually have removed cholesterol, because they're like, crap, we're wrong. There's no evidence that dietary cholesterol. Yeah. There was just so much overwhelming evidence that it's like, no, it doesn't matter how much dietary cholesterol you eat, you're going to make some in your blood. I mean, even, cholesterol is only, in animal products. So it's like, even the fact that vegans even had, cholesterol, it was like, oh crap, I guess we don't need to worry about that. But there is, people really worry about LDL. LDL, when I was a dietitian, I was told that LDL is the bad cholesterol, HDL is the good cholesterol. And that is one thing that when you go on a ketogenic or low carb diet, most people are going to see a pretty solid rise in their LDL cholesterol. And so, of course, that's one thing that keeps doctors from recommending, like, oh no, these low carb diets are bad. They're causing high LDL, and high LDL causes heart disease. If you just look at LDL in a vacuum, I mean, that's what you would think. You were like, okay, people with heart disease often have high LDL. But the issue is, we have so many research studies, and I point out several in the Dietitian's Dilemma, that people with higher LDLs actually have better health outcomes, and for our elderly especially.
I cannot see.
Yeah, it was like for the lower their LDL went, the higher the risk of infection they had. LDL actually appears to be protective in your immune system, very important component of the immune system. So then the question becomes like, okay, well, then why in the world do we see LDL in clogged arteries? Like, Because that's what they thought. That's what doctors thought. That's what Ansel Keys and everybody thought. They said, okay, high LDL in the blood, it's getting stuck in your arteries, it's causing heart disease. But the question people forgot to ask was, why is it getting stuck in your arteries? Because, you know, if you look at a population like the Inuit Eskimos, they ate 80% fat, whale blubber, and they have zero heart disease. Their LDLs are some of the highest levels out there. I'm talking like starting at like 500 and they have no heart disease. So it's like, so something has to happen to that high LDL, because on its own, it's not causing any problems.
Big fat nothing.
Yep. And so that's why we always have to keep asking when things don't make sense. And I would encourage anybody to do this. Ask your doctor, ask your dietitian. If they cannot answer the question for you, then maybe I was going to say find a new doctor or dietitian, but they should be able to answer your question, or at least go say, okay, let me research this. But anyway, the number one cause of, hardening of the arteries, or I guess the number one cause, you have to have some type of inflammation or oxidation for LDL to get stuck in your arteries. And the number one cause of that is high blood sugar over time, is type 2 diabetes, is all these processed carbohydrates. That's why it's also sad story. The Inuit Eskimos, zero heart disease. Now that, Westernization has come in and they eat a lot of processed carbohydrates, the combination of a high carbohydrate diet and high LDL is deadly. That will kill you quickly, because now you have that high blood sugar, you have those damaged arteries, and that's what gets stuck. That's how plaque gets stuck in your arteries. So anyway, on its own, I'm not worried. My LDL is very high. But that's why you can't look at it in a vacuum. You need to look at, what is my blood sugar? What is my A1C? That's your blood sugar over time. What are my triglycerides? What is my fasting insulin? Looking at all those things together. Because once again, LDL on its own is actually a good thing to have it a little bit on the higher side. And I think we're going to have more studies. Dave Feldman is conducting several studies on this. It hopefully will come out relatively soon, because right now it seems like if you come into a doctor's office with high LDL, they're required to prescribe you a statin, which is, we could go down that road, but statins, statistically are pretty ineffective.
Yes. Oh my, I've talked about statins on the Boogeyman episode.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding LDL and statins, I was seeking recently a new healthcare provider. And I ended up, after my visit with this person who shall remain nameless, getting a text from my local pharmacy that my prescription was ready to pick up. So this person had called in a prescription for statins for my 140 very high deadly LDL with my fasting insulin of 3. So as you said, you might consider severing your relationship with, or finding a new provider, which is exactly what I did. I was actually offended that I would have this called in, because there was no discussion of this, by the way. That's what I failed to say. It was just waiting for me to be picked up. So if there's no discussion of it, how could I know about all the side effects? And now I feel that this person, I know too much to go and pick that prescription up, but someone else would say, well, yeah, he wants me to take this, so I'll just take it. And, never mind my, brain function or joint function or immune cell function. I'll just pop this pill. And I feel like that's another one of those areas where I have great issue in healthcare, and that's the cholesterol boogeyman. So thank you for sharing knowledge on that. It doesn't have to come from me. You have the registered dietitian background. So not everyone is in agreement with this, folks. So as we come to a close here, Michelle, I am curious if you could let our audience know, just to keep it simple, one thing that each person could consider doing or do to improve health. What would that one thing be?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to do, because I think there's a lot of people out there that know that there's certain things in their life that are not good, oh, my health isn't good, this isn't good. But I think if you can get away from everybody for an hour, whether you go to Starbucks or somewhere, and just sit and have some like radical honesty with yourself, like really, I think it helps to kind of start by kind of assessing your situation, because some people just will start with some kind of arbitrary goals, like, how I need to lose some weight, or yeah, I should do this or whatever. But I think like for me, that doing him ice bath was kind of like the come to Jesus, like,
That
this
was
is
radical.
really, really bad.
No.
Like my life is really, really bad. And that next day I took some time to just write down like what is really bad. Like and it's not and this isn't like, oh, I suck, I'm a terrible person, but just like things in my life that like I had to take a step back and be like, wow, like I'm really short with my wife. I'm not being a great partner. I am anxious all the time. My body hurts. Like, and when you see all this stuff, sometimes, because sometimes too, it's like, we think like, oh, maybe it's not that bad. I don't, I can keep going. When I like saw this list, I was like, wow, like I really need to change, because I do think you have to get sold before you're going to make like sustainable change. Like you really have to kind of feel it. Like this is a big deal. And so if you can get by yourself and just really list out like, this is where I'm at. And then, and certainly if you want to, you can like, this is where I want to be. And that's also why I think it's nice to work with a health coach or somebody to be like, here's where I am. Can you help me get here? Because ultimately we need a goalpost. I don't think we can have like arbitrary goals. But I do think the first thing is just really being honest with your situation. And that's hard to do. A lot of people don't want to do that. We don't want to look in the mirror and be like, ooh, I've let this get kind of bad.
I love that. I thought you were going to say eat more meat.
Well, I'm always a fan of animal-based protein, but yeah, I mean, if you eat more meat and you're still, not sure like why, I think you've got to start. And I mean, everyone says like, know your why, blah, blah, blah. But even before that, just like ask it, like, where am I now? Like be really honest and like, don't ask anybody. Don't ask your friend or your spouse or like, what do you think? No, like, this is you. This is just you versus you. Because I think when you do that and you sit down, I think a lot of times, like, I know I was surprised and I knew my health wasn't great, but when I started listing out some of those things, I was like, my God, like, yeah, I need to get my act together. Like, come on, Michelle.
You're sitting with it. You're putting it out there. Now you can see it. That's terrific advice.
Well, and then think about like, and another thing, and this is something my father told me when I was a much younger human, and I've seen it play out many times in my life, and certainly, my low carb journey. He said, your life can look totally different in 6 months, like totally different. And in that case, within 6 months of starting my low carb journey, my body's in pain, my mind, everything was a mess. Within 6 months, my health drastically improved. And like you said, if you have, if you need to lose 300 pounds, 200 pounds, like you're not going to do that in 6 months, but think about like where your mindset will be, where your friendships, your partnerships will be, where your professional life will be, where your, just your physical health will be. Like everything in your life can dramatically improve when you start to change, like, I mean, one, just how you eat, but when you start to change how you eat, it changes how you think, it changes how you show up in the world. So yeah.
Awesome, y'all. Radical self-honesty and having that why. So important. That's an intrinsic motivator. I love it. Okay, Michelle, what have I not asked you or mentioned?
Oh my gosh, I feel like we've covered a lot. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I could tell you is my next project. I'm working on something called the Protein Project, and we are working with Ade Fox, and we are trying to raise money for food banks right now, especially that we're recording this around the holidays. And people in need of food, especially emergency food boxes, are given some of the lowest quality food possible. So we are working on getting animal-based foods into food banks, homeless shelters. And yeah, we're just, we've got a GoFundMe up. I was hoping to make it a 501c3, but our federal government, all their wisdom, and the IRS makes it incredibly difficult to get that done. So we're just going to run with it as a GoFundMe and just kind of see how that goes.
And how do we find that on GoFundMe?
I will have to get you the link. So
right.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'll send that to you if you can put it in the show notes. I'd really appreciate that.
I will. So Michelle, tell us how to find you. I'll put in the show notes how to go fund protein.
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. You can get my book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, on Amazon. We've got the paperback, we've got an ebook and the Audible. On Twitter, Michelle Hurn RD. We've got the website, The Dietitian's Dilemma. And yeah, and then I'll put the GoFundMe, reducing food insecurity with animal-based protein.
I love it. It's awesome. I love that you're doing that too. Some of the most vulnerable populations need protein the most. That is awesome. Y'all, thank you so much for tuning in. Michelle, you can see why I admire her greatly. Please follow her. Please fund the Protein Project. Please buy her book. This is awesome. It's chock
Thank you.
full. Another thing I didn't mention, one of my favorite things here at the end are your success stories.
Yeah, we have a lot of great testimonials in there.
Yeah, it's awesome. So y'all find me at Nourishment Mindset on Instagram, Dixie Huey on LinkedIn, or favorfat.com. And please let us know what you think. And as I said, again, please support Michelle Hurn and her projects. It's been a real pleasure to have you on today, and I wish you the best. Thank you for having such an inspiring rebel voice, and I hope to see you at the next conference.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for having me.
All right.